because the fire alarm has gone off. Ready to go? Okay, fantastic. Good morning and welcome to this multi-location meeting of the Culture Connection and Place Scrutiny Committee. It's Friday the 12th of December. I'm Councillor Sean Percy and I'll be chairing the meeting today. As usual, please make sure your phones are switched to silent during the meeting. I'm just going to double check now. For those online, please raise your electronic hands on Teams, but make sure your microphones are muted unless you're called to speak. We don't have any members in the chamber, just officers. Tom's going to run through those in a moment. But for officers in the chamber, just give me an indication if you need to come in on any items. For those members signing in remotely as well, the usual reminder to have your cameras on so that you can be seen and heard. We are aware that at least one member is unwell and will have their camera switched off, and that's absolutely fine. But just the usual reminder there for everybody else. Okay, so I'm just going to hand over to Tom just to read out which members and officers are present in the room today.
Thank you, Chair. So as you're aware, we have the Chair, Councillor Sean Percy, and then in terms of officers, we have Simon Brennan, Craig Griffiths, Brett Siddell, Lisa Willis, and myself, Tom Rees.
Thank you, Tom. So we'll move on to agenda item 2, declarations of interest. Members, are there any declarations of interest?
No declarations, Chair.
If I can just declare an interest, Chair, just so you're aware, I need to declare the fact that I'm the monitoring officer as well for Neath Talbot Council, but for the Corporate Joint Committee at the same time. So I just need to make sure that's what I'm doing.
Thank you, Craig. And as usual, members, if you're aware you need to make a declaration during an item, just pop your hand up and make that declaration just to cover yourself there. Sometimes these things come up.
I need to make a declaration. I'm chair I'm chair of the Swansea Bay City Deal and also vice chair of the South West Wales Joint Committee.
Okay, thank you, Tim. That's great. Okay, so we'll move on then. So agenda item 3 is minutes of the previous meeting on pages 5 to 22. It's quite a large set of minutes. We had quite a thorough discussion in that in those meetings. Can I have a proposer and a seconder, please, that they're an accurate record?
I would propose, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Seconded by Councillor Henton. Members, if you do not indicate to the contrary, then I'll take it these minutes are approved.
See no indication to the contrary, Chair, for those minutes are approved as accurate.
Okay, thank you very much. So we'll move on now to our business of today. So our first item is agenda item 4A. That's on pages 23 to 72, and it's amendments to the Swansea Bay City Deal Joint Committee arrangements and the delegation of functions to the South West Wales Corporate Joint Committee. Craig, do you want to add anything to the report before we go to questions?
I have to go straight to questions, just to give a little bit of overview ultimately as to what this report ultimately is in relation to. So you'll be aware by now that we have 2 regional programmes that are effectively underway at present. We have the Swansea Bay City Deal and we have the South West Wales Corporate Joint Committee. There's been a sort of work programme ultimately that's been ongoing over the last couple of months to look at ways in which we can further integrate the 2 together, obviously in the aid of efficiency, to try and see what savings could ultimately be achieved then at the same time as well. So this is the first report ultimately that's come back to constituent councils. So that will be Neath, Talbot, Swansea, Pembrokeshire and Carmarthenshire to get some authorities internally from those authorities. And the reason being it involves an amendment ultimately to the joint committee agreement that we entered into to create the Swansea Bay City Deal back in 2018. So we just need to make some changes ultimately to the governance aspects related to that, where in essence the decision making then that is already underway in respect to the city deal passes over to the CJC, because it's the same members who are making the decisions at the moment. So what we're proposing to do, instead of having it being done by 2 separate meetings, we do it all under the one umbrella organisation of the Corporate Joint Committee. So what this report ultimately is setting out are some of the technical amendments that need to be made.
We've just got the fire alarm members, so bear with us a moment.
They were testing the electrics.
Okay,
Right, I'll come
Craig,
back.
do you want to continue?
Looks my train of thought, but I'll come back to the rest. So basically now what we're trying to do is make these technical amendments to enable it to be implemented over the course of the next few months. So after consideration today at scrutiny, it will be considered at Cabinet next week. However, because there will also be a corresponding change ultimately to the scrutiny arrangements where we will be merging the two scrutiny committees, that has to be agreed at full council. So a report will also be considered at full council next week. So a lot of detail I appreciate ultimately in the report. Happy to take any questions that members may.
Okay, thank you very much, Craig, for the overview there. We had a couple of indications in pre-briefing, so I'm going to go to Councillor Gareth Rice first. Gareth?
Thank you, Sean. Bear with me, because I was looking everywhere for my notes of what I wrote down, but I can't find them anywhere. I seem to remember it was about the delegated authority of the new.
Yeah, it was in relation to the leader specifically, I think.
Yes.
And whether there was any additional delegated authority.
I was trying to find the reference in the document just now before we started, but I couldn't find the exact what page it was on, so apologise for that. But I remember it being somewhere about the leader of the authority having delegated authority for the new committee, which I don't seem to recall it was in the previous committee. So I was looking for clarification on that one, please.
Yeah, of course. So the way there's two particular elements here that ultimately involve the leader. So you note in the first instance, one of the recommendations in the report is granting a delegated authority ultimately to myself in consultation with the leader of council to amend the Swansea Bay City Deal Joint Committee Agreement. That's just the political oversight necessary for the technical terms that are being changed into the documentation and having it signed off in that capacity. You've seen in previous reports that often when a decision is being taken ultimately to do something, the head of service ultimately involved will be acting in consultation with a relevant cabinet member. So that's just the technical element that will enable that to take place. So under the current auspices at the moment of the city deal, the leader is the council's appointee to the joint committee that makes the decision making in that regard. Under the corporate joint committee, it's a very slightly different format, because what that says is the voting member at the CJC committee itself will always be the leader of council. So any reference to the leader is just in accordance with the legislative provisions. Nothing has changed from the current makeup ultimately that's been there, or there's no changes to any delegations or powers that have been granted. It's just a continuation of the exact same system that we have at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Craig. Is that clear, Gareth?
Yeah, okay, that's fine. Thank you. Cheers.
Okay, brilliant. So the next indication was from myself actually, so I'll just quickly ask my question. Just in terms of the organisational structure of both entities, in terms of the City Deal and the CJC, the report makes reference to staffing resource and support, and it gives some sort of financial indication of how much is being spent at the moment around the City Deal administration, but it doesn't really give an indication of sort of how many staff that involves and what impact this might have on the staff. And I know it's potentially a bit of a sensitive issue, but I'm conscious that, you know, as we can't see what sort of roles they are. And I know the CJC is kind of ramping up. What I can't see it when I look at the report is other opportunities for these staff to sort of fit into the CJC process, or actually in the efficiency of merging these two kind of entities in one sense. Are we going to potentially have some staff at risk?
So there is a programme of work that is ultimately ongoing at the moment. So for those of you who are familiar ultimately with the CJC, we don't actually have any staff ultimately at the CJC level. It's by way of secondment ultimately with various officers, with individual work programmes being undertaken by constituent councils. So what the CJC is now embarking on, and we will have the new Chief Operating Officer in post ultimately from the middle of next year, is actually a scoping exercise. So that's going to be looking at the resourcing requirements ultimately that we need to support the ever-increasing work that seems to be going through the CJC at the moment, and all of the additional policy requirements that are ultimately placed on us, and looking then to see how we can utilise the structures ultimately that we have developed ultimately under the City Deal programme to serve both purposes ultimately at that point. So the staff members in question are ultimately employed by Carmarthenshire Council at the city level. So any sort of performance management or change employment related issues will be led ultimately by Carmarthenshire as part of that. But what we're looking to do at the moment is mitigate any potential impacts to the fullest extent possible by looking to see how, as part of this merger and this integration, how we can effectively serve both purposes and bring some of those elements then under the auspices of the CJC going forward. So it is a programme of work that is specifically on the way at the moment, which will still have to be concluded probably going into early 2026, but we're working the hardest we can to try and make sure that there's minimum impacts where possible.
Okay, thank you, Craig. Will that be reported back to the CJC?
It'll probably go back to the City Deal Joint Committee and the CJC Committee in some format as well. So the scrutiny forums that we have there will have the opportunity to look at this to see specifically how it's going to be addressing those programmes of work.
Okay, great, because I know the report did sort of acknowledge a lot of sort of work over a period of time has happened within that City Deal. There's a lot of staff knowledge and networks and relationships that have been built up, but obviously we don't want to dismantle that piece of work, and this isn't what's proposed at all, is it? So
not at all.
I can understand every effort's going to be made to sort of continue some of that. Okay, that's great. I got an indication from Councillor Tim Bowen. Tim?
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's to Craig anyway. With the merger of the both of them, Craig, would we look to increase the committee size, or would we have to keep them as they are now? Because I know there's members on the Swansea Bay that have been on it a long time and would like to see a lot of these projects through. So would members have to come off for their members to go on, or could we increase the committee?
So as it stands at the moment, the CJC committee, which will have the responsibility of overseeing this, has 3 members ultimately for each committee, each local authority ultimately being appointed. So the final decision maker ultimately to increase those numbers will be at the CJC level. However, there's no limit ultimately on the number of seats that can be offered to constituent councils. So one of the suggestions ultimately, which I picked up in the report, is if members wish to ask for that to be considered, I can easily request that ultimately at the CJC for the 4 leaders and the decision makers under the CJC then to make a request ultimately to increase that number. So it's certainly possible, but the decision, it wouldn't be one ultimately for Neath Talbot Council to make, it will be one for the CJC to make its determination on, Councillor Bowen.
Okay, a second question. So the money that's in the pot at the moment for the Swansea Bay, would that then go over to West Wales and be put towards any projects that they've got as well?
So the City Deal funding ultimately for certain aspects of the POMO, I think we've said in the report, will come to an end then from 2026 for certain aspects of it there. But those programmes are still in flow ultimately, that will be continuing for the next couple of years anyway, at least. So even though the impacts of the POMO office may ultimately change, the programme delivery, and I got Lisa Willis in here, I know is doing a lot of work on that, they will continue indefinitely ultimately until those projects have continued. So nothing will change in respect to the City Deal programmes of work themselves.
Okay, lovely, thank you.
There we are. Thanks, Rebecca. See Nicola Pierce has, I thought you put your hand up there, Nicola.
Yeah, I did. I was going to say what Craig said then, and I'm sorry I'm not in person. I've had a terrible cold and a cough, and I didn't want to come and spread my germs to everybody before Christmas. But yeah, the projects that are currently funded out to City Deal are standalone projects, and the funding is specifically allocated to those projects, and they will continue to run, and for the lifetime of those projects.
Thanks, Nicola. Just briefly a comment from me just around the sort of scrutiny element of it. And, I sit on the CJC Scrutiny Committee, and, I think there's been a lot of discussion around this sort of increase in regional working and how important it is that that work is scrutinised, and that there is an appropriate democratic process to all of that, because I think it is getting a little bit confusing sometimes for members, officers, and members of the public.
And officers as well.
And monitoring officers. To work out some of the accountability and particularly we got funding streams changing and moving into the CJC. So just on Tim's point, I think it is important that we've got a strong scrutiny committee at that regional level, and I would certainly advocate having the right capacity there in terms of support from members. So I just wanted to make that comment because I think that is important. Sorry.
Yeah, just to come back in, what I would suggest ultimately to members, obviously, is the scrutiny elements will be picked up at the council meeting next week. Obviously, it can be raised at that council meeting, and I can note that then as part of the commentary, which will give me the weight ultimately to take it back then into the main CJC meeting itself. So what I would suggest is if anyone can raise that next week in full council, so full council gets the oversight of it, and I can note that then going forward.
Thanks, Craig. I'll definitely make a comment for that. So, Tim, did you want to come back on this one before I move
yeah,
on to Laura?
only quickly. Yeah, only quickly. We've had one meeting with the South West Wales this year where we weren't correct. So if they do merge, is there any way we can do what we do now, where we have another member delegated to step into that position, so we don't come to that situation again?
It's already been done, Councillor, but when I took a report ultimately to the CJC, I think it went in October time, allowing the opportunity for a substitute. So fingers crossed we'll never be in that position again. So yeah, we've got a similar arrangement as we've got now with our own scrutiny arrangements.
Yeah, you moved very quickly on that one, Craig. I was quite surprised. Laura, Councillor Williams, you did have your hand up.
Yeah, it's just been covered. I was just going to add the question about the substituting in, but yeah, you covered the rest of my questions. Thank you.
There we are. No problem. So I had one last question, which was around the local authority levies to the CJC, and I know that's it is a matter for the CJC, but I was just wondering at this stage, was there any indication that the change in the arrangements would result in, an additional cost to the CJC that could then lead to an additional levy onto local authorities?
So the local authority, the levy towards local authorities now will be set at the CJC meeting in January, and I think the scrutiny committee will be looking at that ultimately just beforehand, just to look at that. But all attempts are being made ultimately to limit the impact ultimately back to local authorities as part of this levy element, looking at additional funding that's been made available ultimately from Welsh Government as well in respect to some of the strategic programmes of work which are underway. So what we're hoping ultimately is there is no increase in burden ultimately back to local authorities. Obviously, with a new chief operating officer coming in next year, new models of work, and maybe looking at new powers maybe that ended up going to be given to the CJC, that will always have to be kept under review as part of that. But no, I think the CJC is very conscious about the corresponding impact on the budgetary position of local authorities, so does what it can to keep that levy at the lowest level that it can.
Okay, thanks, Craig. One to pick up in CJC, I think. Okay, so I can't see any other indications from members on this one. The recommendations are listed on page 28 to 29 of the agenda pack. Could I have a pauser and seconder, please, members? And all come forward at once. Okay, I can see some waving at me now. Councillor Carl Jordan and Councillor Andrew Dacey. Thank you both. Members, if you do not indicate to the contrary, then I'll take it this report is approved.
I see no indications of the contrary, Chair, but this report has been approved.
Thank you, Tom. Okay, so we'll now move on to item 4B, which is the decarbonisation delivery plan for council operational activities 2025 to 2030. It's on pages 73 to 156, and members will be aware this report is for Norton, so there's no decision, but there's a lot of interesting information in the report for discussion today. So before we go to questions, do officers wish to give an introduction or add anything to the report? So we've got Brett and we've got Simon.
Yeah, I certainly can. So thank you, Chair. So this is this delivery plan is the culmination of 18 months of work in conjunction with the Carbon Trust. And it's in direct response to a comment that was raised by Audit Wales in terms of our activity in this area. So we've created this delivery plan, which, and I need to stress that it solely focuses on council operational activities. Okay, so it doesn't involve residents, doesn't involve businesses. It's only around those activities which we've got direct control over on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, that's great. Anything to add, Simon, before we go to questions?
No, thank you, Chair.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. So we will go to questions from pre-briefing. So the first one was from Councillor Gareth Rice.
Thank you, Sean. Again, without my notes, I'm trying to remember what it was. It was.
This was about the Any Cymru capital grant
That was it, yeah.
bidding process.
Page 124. And I just want to comment that the report was very thorough, so thanks. There's a lot of information to take in there. Page 124 and over to 125 about the Any Cymru grant. Wasn't sure if it says it's submitted a grant, but it doesn't actually say whether or not it was delivered and completed in the keys in the SRC. So I just wanted a bit of clarification on that point, please.
Okay, thanks, Gareth. Yeah, Brett.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. So we were successful. We've spent the last 5 months in discussions with Any Cymru, discussing the level of the award, because they, after we were notified, and this was supposed to be a 75% grant from Any Cymru with 25% match from the council, it changed to their first offer was they were going to give us 10% grant. So I said, unfortunately, that wasn't acceptable, because, we couldn't support the additional match that would be required. So we've been having discussions since July, and they've now increased that to 20%, which we've accepted. And the Any Cymru grant will now fund the smart elements of the project. So that includes a battery for the SRC and monitoring and management software that will be used to cover the whole Keys campus. Another slight change to the project was the original project covered the Keys, solar PV on the Keys and the SRC, but because the Keys roof needs a repair, which is not going to be undertaken until April at the earliest of next year, and bearing in mind that the Any Cymru element of this grant has to be spent by the end of March next year, we were able to change out the Keys element and replace that with the salt barn that's also on the Keys campus, because the original feasibility study that we had undertaken by Dulles covered the Keys, the SRC and the salt barn. So Any Cymru were quite happy with us swapping out the Keys for the salt barn, and the Keys will form part of a phase 2 project further down the road. And then to make up the shortfall of the grant from Any Cymru, we've applied to the Salix All Wales funding programme, and I'm waiting an email. We are aware that it has passed all the relevant stages, so I'm just waiting on a formal email to confirm that. So the total cost of the revised project is just short of £400,000. So that will put PV onto the SRC, the salt barn. There'll be a battery storage system and management software for the Keys campus. So I hope that answers your question.
It does.
Thank
yeah.
You,
Sorry, can you come back to that, Sean?
Yeah, of course you can. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, it's quite disappointing that they've run around there from 75% down to 20 is quite a bit of a shortfall. But that raises the question: when you submitted the grant for this money, you obviously would have been relying on that extra money, but now we've had to fund it ourselves. Where did that extra money come from? What budget would that come from within NPT?
So we're not funding it ourselves. We're funding it via the Salix All Wales funding programme.
Right. So they funded
there appears to be a new approach with a number of these funding schemes, in that if there is a project that has a payback period of 10 years or less, they're looking to have those projects funded through the Salix route to demonstrate that there's a need for a scheme like the Salix All Wales funding programme, and so they can fund ultimately more projects from the Any Cymru grant.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Gareth. And just, I think the Salix funding is what we've used to do street lighting, isn't it, in the past for replacements, I think, to LEDs. I can see Simon nodding. Okay, so the next indication I had was from Councillor Laura Williams, and that was in relation to EV charging.
Yeah,
Laura?
so it's just around EV charging in our public car parks. Is there a timeline for the rolling out of this to extend further to further car parks? and could extending these charging points extend the use of our EV council fleet by being in further car parks such as Pontardawe?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. So just to give you some facts around the number of EV chargers that we currently have in Neath Port Talbot, we have 17 fast public EV chargers. So that's where they charge between 7 to 22 kilowatts. We have 7 chargers in Neath multi-storey car park. There are 8 in Margam Park and 2 in Avon Forest Park. Across the county borough, there are 65 publicly available EV charging points, and that includes 24 rapid chargers. So just to put this in context, back in 2020, across the whole of the local authority, we had 5 chargers. And as of 2025, we currently have 205 chargers. And that also includes the chargers that we have to charge our fleet of vehicles. So what we're undertaking at the moment are a number of projects. So the first one is, and you may all be very familiar with the issue around cross pavement charging. So this is where a resident may live in a terraced house. They may not have a garden or a driveway, and most of the time they will try and park in front of their home. So it's if those individuals were to have an electric vehicle, how can they safely charge their vehicle using their domestic supply? So we had quite a bit of interest from residents about what the council was doing in this regard. And we've started a project this summer, and we had 42 applications from residents, and we're trying to get a broad spread of different types of properties. So not just terraced houses, but it could be people who live in flats, for instance, and also spread across the county borough. Those applications, and residents were asked to submit photographs of their buildings. They're not allowed to be within 10 metres of a junction, for instance. So once we've evaluated those applications, we've identified 15 potential locations to undertake a phase 1 project, and that will be around installing a gully across the pavement. So this is, if you like, a U-shaped channel that goes into the pavement. The cable is hidden within that gully. It has a flat top surface, so there is no protruding elements that could be a trip hazard for pedestrians, for instance. So that's a real positive step, actually supporting our residents with their request, because they were saying that the initial stance from the council was that we would not permit these gullies, and then we've gone back to cabinet and that decision has been changed to allow us to undertake these projects. So thank you to all of those involved, because this is a really important project for the EV charging in the area. A second project we've just started is around public charging on streets, and this is using chargers that are connected to lampposts. And what's quite interesting is Neath Port Talbot are the only local authority within the South West Wales region that have suitable lampposts that can be used for this activity. Because if you have wooden lampposts, this doesn't work. There's got to be a particular type of lampposts. And Newport have actually run really successful trials in this area, and now this is their main focus of on-street charging in Newport. So we're using GIS mapping that will identify suitable locations, and we will compare that with our lamppost stock to find suitable lampposts. And then we will look to engage with a company that can offer a solution for this. So another area of activity around EV charging is we're developing an EV infrastructure delivery plan, which will include car parks. So this will help us identify suitable car parks. Not all car parks or locations are suitable, actually. You know, we're finding that, I think for the chargers that we currently have, Neath multi-storey car park is the most well used, as one could probably expect, given the traffic that comes through that area. And some of the country parks, the chargers are not well used at all. So, you know, you really have to consider the case on a case-by-case basis. Again, all of these activities are dependent on identifying suitable sources of external funding to enable them to happen. And we're also, the final area of activity is looking at community EV charging hubs. And we think this is a really important area for those that don't have home charging but have an EV vehicle, will need to charge their vehicle at some point. So can we identify suitable community hubs across the county borough where we could have multiple chargers and residents could make use of those chargers? So those are the projects that we have ongoing at the moment around electric vehicles. So I hope that's answered your question, Councillor.
Okay, brilliant. Laura, did you want to?
Yeah, can I come back quickly? So will that be coming to us as a scrutiny committee, or I'm guessing the other scrutiny, which is street scene?
I would assume it would be visible based on how that would fall, to be honest, Councillor Williams, but I can double check the remits and let the committee know afterwards.
No problem. This is probably a question for when the paper comes round. You just spoke about the community hubs. Would there be an option there to take a look at some of our community assets, or buildings that are community centres that are leased from the authority as community hubs?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, Simon.
Yeah, yeah, we've been looking at a number of sort of community buildings, things like schools and things like community centres. One of the challenges is the power that's available there, and some of the systems that are quite antiquated. So sometimes it'll need to be where you've got a decent supply coming into the building, but also a decent electrical system there that can handle the additional load that would go onto it from the charging points. But it is something we're definitely looking at.
Okay, thanks, Simon. Is that okay, Laura? Brilliant. Okay, but a lot of hands going up on this bit of discussion now. So, Councillor Tim Bowen, you next.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I didn't hear if they actually said there's chargers up in the Knoll Country Park. If they did, do we know when they're actually going to go live up there? Because they weren't working last week.
Thanks, Tim. Any ideas, Brett?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. There will be EV chargers at Knoll Country Park. I'm not sure when they're going live. My understanding is the location of those chargers will be where they currently have one of these large containers that's blocking the spaces. So that needs to be moved first. But
So they are actually in at the moment. They just haven't gone live.
So we can check that for you, Councillor. Yeah, we're happy to check that, and we'll send a note through to you. It may just be that, I mean, I know that they're phasing some of the bits and pieces in there. For instance, I know the children's play is coming into place probably in early January. So there's a gradual phasing of all the bits and pieces. Why that's not come online yet, I'm not sure, but we will check for you.
Yeah, we had a poor woman plug herself in last week and sat there for over an hour and they weren't working.
Oh, bless her. No, thanks.
Okay, thanks.
A commissioning issue, isn't it? But I know they lit up, aren't they, Tim? Because I went for a walk through and I know the lights are on. But okay, Simon. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I probably should add. I think what we have found with some of the EV chargers that we put in is that the software behind them is quite temperamental. We've had a number of challenges in various different places, and that has been an issue for us over the last. And I think if you go around a lot of the EV chargers around the country, they're often, some of them are out of action, and it seems to be more software issues rather than hardware issues as far as we can tell so far.
Okay, thanks.
Going to go to Councillor Kerry Clark. Helen.
Thanks, Sean. I was speaking to Nicola last week when we were having a discussion about the RLDP, and I think something that we should be encouraging, if not mandating as a council, where we're building new estates, where we're building new housing, I feel that every house should be required to have an EV point built on it as part of the plan requirements, and where it's not possible that we have a community EV point. as part of the planning. Would that be something that we could do as a local authority?
Thanks for that. I don't know if we've got anyone Nicola's hand has gone up there with her planning experience, so I'll defer to Nicola on this one.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, we had a discussion earlier in the week in relation to the replacement local development plan. There are requirements in national planning policy at the moment to require a proportion of new developments to have electricity, renewable energy, charging infrastructure within the properties. Now, the likelihood is that as the transition to net zero escalates in pace, that will become more of a requirement under national legislation as well as local policy. So the likelihood is that planning policy will change as time moves on to keep pace with the changing nature of the vehicles that we are driving. But we are in the planning system already requiring some developments to have an element of charging infrastructure built into them. But not 100% at the moment, I'm afraid. But as I say, that's likely to escalate or accelerate as time moves on.
Okay, thanks, Nicola. Is that okay, Helen? I appreciate we've strayed a little from the agenda item, but we're not wildly off track. So I'm quite happy to sort of round the conversation up on this topic. Just on that particular note, when we had a development down in my ward with Persimmon on the seafront, what they did was give people the option when they were specifying their new build house to have an EV charger if they wanted it, but it wasn't a default on all of the properties. And I had some concerns about that approach, but that was their way of approaching it. I'm going to take Councillor Gareth Rice and then Councillor Hurley, and then hopefully we can get a little bit back onto the operational elements, because I suspect these might be regarding the public as well. Councillor Rice, Gareth.
Yep, thank you, Sean. Just a couple of comments that came up while Laura was asking questions. First of all, regarding Tim, but he mentioned the lady in the knoll plugged herself in for an hour. I hope she didn't plug herself in. It was the car, not herself. That'd been quite shocking if, pardon the pun. With regards to the EV home charging and the trial with that, I'm sure we all know, massive problems around the county of people parking or not being able to park outside their home, especially if it's the front of the house is on the pavement. So if we're going to trial and allow people to have the gully charging outside their home, are we then going to guarantee they got parking outside their home to facilitate this, or are we going to rely solely on community hubs to allow people to charge from lampposts? And if we are going to lampposts, how do we charge them for electric? How do you get payment for that? Thank you.
Thanks, Gareth.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. So, it's obviously difficult in terms of the parking situation in front of certain types of houses, especially terrace houses. There is another option which we will be looking at, which comes as part of phase 2 of this activity. There is a system where you can install, for the want of a better word, sockets into the pavement. So these are flush circular ports that up until the start of this year were only connected to the public network. Okay, and it requires the person who has an EV to have what's called a LAN. So it's quite a large plastic device that plugs into the socket and it stands upright with the cable connecting into the car. Now, the latest development with the sockets is that they can be connected into somebody's domestic supply. So what you could have is, for instance, you could have a street that has, say, 10 of these sockets on the street. So it gives the resident the option, if they can't park in front of their house, they could go to a space where there is a socket and plug into that. Now, the options there are that they could either use the public electricity supply, and obviously that's going to be at a higher rate, or if that socket is connected to a domestic supply as well, they could use the domestic supply so the resident earns some money from that other person using that supply. So I think there are a number of options to counter the issue of, not being able to park in front of your own property.
Okay, thanks, Brett. It is an emerging area, isn't it? Okay, I'm going to go to Councillor Hurley and then I will drag us back to the paper. Jeremy?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, it's just to sort of give a wider overview as well. I know Brett mentioned that this is council-centric and what we are doing, but we're also influencing quite a lot externally the council, which is part of it, I think. So, we're not going to get anywhere unless others join us on the journey. And this, for example, with the city deal, the buildings we put up, the Bay Technology Centre, the schemes that we've run through HAPS, I went to a conference in Margam Park where we had all the RSLs. So, the funding that we've given the RSLs to put solar and renewables into their new projects, which is obviously taking it wider. What we're doing through the business teams where we linked in with the innovation on renewables. So we've obviously got the hydrogen centre down in Baglan, which had a electrolyser funding again through SPF, I think, which is obviously going to expand that, but they're also expanding into the Fabian Way, sort of where Fords used to be, to a hydrogen centre where we're trying to bring in businesses, so it'll become a hydrogen cluster. And there's going to be, obviously, there's planning in for a refuelling plant there, which is, a great thing for us. Lots of things we do with Lisa's team through SPF, the amount of renewables projects we funded, some innovative ones. We had hydro up in Kilababith, and that guy is also put in for a second hydro project now, funding elsewhere. So we're doing absolutely loads to spread the news and to spread how the influence goes outside the council. So just thanks to all the teams. Even down to education, I went on a carbon assessment course, and I've done a carbon assessment course for a one-man, two-vehicle business. So the work involved for Brett and the team to do it cross-council with that amount of employees, that amount of vehicles, that amount of properties is absolutely huge. So, like I said, don't underestimate the work that they are doing to try and make us reach our targets. And so thanks to all. Thanks, Sean. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jeremy, for that overview there. And it leads me on to, I suppose, one of my questions, which was around decarbonisation of building stock. And then we've discussed a few sort of quite good schemes, actually, that are ongoing. Some of those flagship buildings like we've got down in the NG Park. But then we've got buildings like we're in now in Port Talbot Civic Centre, which has a long way to go. Neath Civic Centre, there's a lot of work to be done there. And then we've got lots of other operational buildings as well. That perhaps, where there's also a lot of work to do. And one of the things I was conscious about when I was looking at the report and thinking about what we developed over the last few years is, whilst we've got some of these good flagship schemes, we've also carried out some developments that are not net zero, that could be more energy efficient. And I was wondering whether this piece of work feeds into now how we're going to approach future developments. I'm thinking, for example, Neath Leisure Centre is one that comes to mind, and the library there, obviously built to current building regulations, but not going as far as the building we've got down in Baglan Energy Park. So that was sort of on my mind, and looking at Simon and the accommodation strategy. Does this operational plan for net zero tie into that accommodation strategy? So is that accommodation strategy aiming to get us to that point as well? It's more of a question for you, Simon, I think. But,
yes, okay. Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Yeah, I think it's. I don't think anybody is underestimating this challenge, and the costs associated with it are significant. I think all we can do as an organisation is continue to make progress. The ambition of 2030 was a very ambitious ambition, if you like. And And I think, I don't think, my understanding is the only organisation in Wales who will be able to actually agree to get to that point was probably NRW. Everybody else is on that journey. We'll push hard. There are still challenges with some of the technologies. Some of them work better in some buildings than they do in others, and we have to recognise that. And also, there's, I suppose, one of the challenges is that if you want to go down that path, you've got to plan ahead a lot of the time. And because of the budget situation that we've got, we tend to run kit until it's died several times. So it falls over, we resurrect it, keep it going for a while, and then you're having to almost really replace it with a like for like. I'm thinking of things like the boiler systems. Yeah. And I mean, we do know that, in one of the comps that we looked at, and I think we've said this before, I think the price for replacing the gas boiler system with a like for like, or a better version of what was there before, and we do try and reconfigure it so it's better and more efficient, was around 60 odd thousand. To replace it with the renewable solution was over 640,000, I think. So if we make that decision, that means other schools don't have anything. And that's the problem that we've got, I think. We're trying to manage the best that we can with the limited resources that we've got, and maintenance budgets have not been improved significantly over the years, whilst costs have risen significantly. So we're trying to manage it within that whole system the best that we can. Obviously, when we do new builds, they tend to have more renewables in them. You mentioned Neath Civic. We are looking at maybe a canopy on the multi-storey car park that could feed into Neath Leisure Centre, because it's a 24/7 use, or basically it's only 24/7 use. So all the time we're looking at opportunities, but we do know that we're limited by the finances that we've got.
Yeah, I think I appreciate that. When we had a little bit of a discussion in pre-brief, there's one thing about retrofitting buildings which is challenging, but even when we do a new development, having seen through many of these projects now over many years, cost and budget is always a challenge on the new schemes that we're doing with the grant funded schemes. We're always having to trim little things here and there, value engineer things, and it is hard, isn't it, to specify things to be as best as they can be. But I think the challenge we've got is if we don't do that, we then have to retrofit them at a later date. So we create those problems down the line, don't we? And I think it's just something for us all to be mindful of when we're looking at priorities in future developments, because there's some nice to haves, isn't there? But sometimes we're leaving ourselves a legacy problem, down the line. But I think I can see Councillor Hurley's popped his hand up. I'll let you come in on this one, Jeremy.
Thanks, Sean. Again, going back to the funding, and if we've got the funding, we can do it. The example is Rosehaven, recognised by Welsh Government on the previous work we've done on the schools. So we now get, Simon will correct me, I think it's 100% funding for Rosehaven, which is going to be net zero, full of new technology, cutting edge. And I think it's an example. It's only 2 schools in Wales, or only 2 authorities in Wales have had this funding. So yeah, a great project. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. And yeah, it's an example of both ends of that, isn't it? It's a great project, but there's only 2 in Wales, and they're not all funded to the same level, are they?
I think, some of the schemes like Bay Technology Centre, for example, which is, sort of one of the more sort of forward-thinking schemes, I think, that has been done in Wales to make it carbon zero, or working towards carbon zero. The good thing about that is that learning for Morgan Sindel, who built it, is being reproduced elsewhere. So they don't forget that bit. And whilst, it's for us, it's a bit of a pathfinder, and there are some teething problems with it, as there always are with new technologies. What it does mean is that'll get refined along the way. And that was the whole idea of it, really, was that we took the first step, but that learning is there now for the consultants. It's there for Morgan Sindel, and will be replicated across Wales. And I think they've already reproduced it in some points. And, we might even be able to do some of it when we do the developments on Harbourside, for example. So every step is a good step forward.
Yeah, I think it accelerates, doesn't it? And particularly with retrofit as well.
Yeah.
Because I know we've got the scheme in Velindre, for example, where we're looking at the old ELRS Library Headquarters building, and there's going to be a lot of retrofit work done there bring that up to spec. I know it's not a net zero building, but it'll be significantly better than it currently is. And I think that'll be an interesting exercise for us as a council, because generally speaking, we've done a lot more new builds than some of these really big retrofit schemes, haven't we? So I think it'll be it's learning points, isn't it? But sorry, Brett, do you want to
just a couple of points, and to add to what Simon was saying, you know, we've had a lot of global interest with the Baytech from Canada and Kazakhstan. You know, so they're really looking at that as an exemplar building that could be, you know, replicated in their own countries. The one key point I'd like to make is, as we've touched on, you know, grant funding is key here. Okay, we get very short notice of when funds are made available, so it's almost like, you know, we have a knee-jerk reaction to, right, we've got to use this project for that call. Okay. And a case in point, this summer, it was like, you know, the bus analogy. We were there, we were notified by 3 different Welsh Government departments, same closing date. We had 3 weeks to respond. We applied to all 3 calls. Fortunately, we won 2 of them, which is great news. But again, the issue there is that it's got to be delivered by the end of March. And, you know, they spend 5-6 months discussing technicalities and administrative issues, so it eats into our delivery time. But one of the interesting developments, so the Welsh Government Energy Service released a development grant last summer. So that is to enable local authorities to get projects to a shelf-ready stage, if you like. So whereas in the past, you know, we've only had a 6-week window to deliver a REBA stage 3 level project, which was quite impossible. Now we've got the time to work up these project ideas, and one of them, as Simon mentioned, is looking at solar canopies across our estates, so that when the next call comes out, we can just pull those projects off the shelf and they can be, you know, fully supported. So I think that's a positive development. But the grant funding is a major issue, because that's what we're relying on to deliver all of the projects that DEC are working on.
Yeah.
And when we never know when they, you know, we have monthly meetings with Welsh Government representatives to try and understand, you know, what's coming over the horizon, and we, you know, we have a pipeline of ideas and things like that, but it's very much dependent on what's made available.
Yeah, I mean, Simon will know that having a project pipeline will be music to my ears, because that's
absolutely
I'm always an advocate for.
Yeah, I mean, and having the resource to do that would be absolutely fantastic. Obviously, for us, it's been a challenge over the last decade, because we've lost so many members of staff, but also because it's difficult sometimes getting the right consultants out there as well, where we have to buy the service in. So, I mean, I think, you know, it is a positive step to see if we can get some on the shelf, albeit that things still change along the way and technologies change, and maybe our strategies with our buildings change, etc. And, you know, the issue around the grant timing is not just restricted to that, it's everything that we do. Everything, every single grant process needs to be done so quickly that it puts an immense amount of pressure on the teams.
Members hear this again and again, not just in this committee, but we hear it in other committees as well. And it is a big barrier, isn't it, to efficient delivery of some of these things. I'm going to move us on to another question I've got around on page 101 about staff travel, if that's okay. And it noted here that we did a travel survey, and we had 522 staff respond, which I was a little bit disappointed at. I know it is difficult to get responses to survey activity, but actually this is a real critical piece of work, I think, in terms of you know, looking at how our staff travel. And I was wondering, are we looking to repeat that exercise and sort of get some more robust data there? And I was wondering how much we're delving into that data to understand where some people are living and where the places of work are, because I think there is a piece of work to be done there. You know, I've been critical, you know, in other forums in the council in the past around, you know, we subsidise staff parking, but we don't subsidise staff bus travel, train travel. And, you know, we've got things to think about if we're going to reduce, you know, just the carbon impact of staff travel out. So I'm just curious if we can do some more work on that survey and get that data a bit more robust. I don't know. Brett, if you've got some info on that.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So just to put the number of responses in context, so we undertook this, well, Carbon Trust created the survey on our behalf, and this was undertaken in August of 2024. So obviously we couldn't get responses from school staff, so this didn't include any school staff. So it went out to 4,144 council staff. So that's a 12.6 return rate. So I think in terms of survey responses, where you would expect about 10%, I think this is on par. Okay, so but obviously in future surveys, we would look to undertake those when we can capture the school staff responses. There were, of those that responded, 95% travelled by car, 3% used public transport. Of the 3%, 2% travelled by bus. So that equates to 10 respondents from that survey. But we will undertake a further survey. It will be a much more detailed survey so we can understand, the different modes of transport, whether they're car sharing, whether they, the number of times they're coming in on average to the office, and whether they go to different locations as well. We've also had an internal discussion where we currently have the cycle to work scheme, but there is the possibility of setting up a cycle in work scheme. So where staff are commuting between offices for meetings, we have some e-bikes that could be used for that purpose.
That's been discussed in another committee meeting, recently.
Yeah, so we don't know how much uptake there will be for that, but we are looking at all possible options to try and decarbonise the commuting journey, because that's one of the areas that's focused on within the decarb delivery plan.
And I think that's one of the reasons I picked it out, and I appreciate, 10% is a good benchmark for surveys, but actually I think we've got to consider this to be a critical piece of data. And, if we approach it in that manner, we need to get that actually really, really high in order to actually understand where the low-hanging fruit is in the organisation around those staff travel patterns, because there will be small interventions we can make, whether that is nudging people to different modes of transport, not, for example, giving car parking permit to somebody that travels to an office very close to where they live and doesn't need to travel as part of their job. Those sorts of things are actions we could take where actually we say, well, you can get a bus, you can get a train, or you can walk. Because it is a bit backwards that we subsidise people to drive into the office, even if they live round the corner. And I know that's a controversial view for some people, but I just think without the data, we can't really understand the full picture. And I am very keen that we offer support to people that are absolutely reliant on public transport as well, and that have no option other than to use public transport. Sorry, they aren't able to drive, because if we don't do that, we're actually employing a car-dependent workforce as well. We might be not employing people that don't own cars, that have to catch public transport, and that's where the operational thing comes in as well. How much flexibility is in the service areas? Are we being so restrictive on our staff that they can't use public transport, and therefore somebody who doesn't own a car doesn't apply for a job with the council, so we are only employing? So there's those sorts of thoughts actually, where the more you delve into this data, you can kind of understand, well, how representative is our workforce compared to the general commuting patterns of the community. So that's kind of where I'm getting at. There's a lot of analysis to be done, and I think it's hard to do it on 522 staff, isn't it? Sorry, Simon.
I think there are a lot of challenges around the use of staff cars in work. In environment, for example, we send an awful lot of staff out on site. Sometimes at the drop of a hat. We send a lot of staff between buildings for meetings. In terms of the public transport element, obviously, we all know the issues around getting staff into the office from wherever they are around the county borough or outside the county borough, and that can be a long process, unfortunately, with catching different buses. When we moved to the Quays initially, we did divert the bus route there, and the take-up was almost zero. The empty bus came past and went back again. The staff car parking issue, of course, is more complicated now because of hybrid working. Previously, we did charge staff for coming into the office for using the car parks, but because now some staff have to come in 5 days a week, other staff can stay at home and maybe only come in 1 day a week. It's a little bit unfair to penalise those who were asking to come into the office by saying, yes, and you have to pay car parking charges and you have to pay to come to work. You have to travel, you pay your travel costs. So we are mindful of that in the whole policy side of it as well, I think. And you're right, there isn't an easy answer to this, is there? I think because of the use of Teams, we have limited significantly. I remember we used to be constantly on the road to Mid Wales, for example, for meetings, and we all meet up there, whereas now virtually all of them are done on Teams. So I think that has helped considerably reduce that in-work mileage part of it. And Google Maps is a godsend for us as well. There's so many site inspections you can sort of do through using Google Maps.
A Street View site visit.
Yeah. At least gives you an indication before having to think about whether to send somebody out. So there's all sorts of other bits of technology we can use, I think, that make life easier and better. And those are the bits that I think, we need to focus on as well with staff, and making sure that we don't send anybody out for trips that don't have to absolutely happen. And for meetings that could be done on Teams rather than.
And I think that's all very sensible. I think that's where the data element is so important, isn't it? We don't want to penalise staff that have to travel as part of their job and have to use a car, but we need to understand what everybody's doing, why they're doing it, and some of that is about the staff themselves, and some of that is actually a departmental thing, isn't it? Actually, what are accountable managers and supervisors doing to encourage or discourage people to travel between offices and sites? And it's a big piece of work. I don't envy you on that one, trying to unpick it. But I will keep banging the drum on public transport, because I do think we forget about it a lot. If you look at the ONS statistics around the census data for the percentage of people that have no access to a car in Neath Talbot, that does not tally up with our staff. We don't have 95% of residents of Neath Talbot having access to a car. It's significantly lower. So that's just a point for me to put in there. I've got a couple more questions, members. If anyone else does have any, please pop your hands up. So I don't want to keep talking for too long. No one believes that, but I'm going to say it anyway. So the other operational sort of question I had was, it arose from a visit I had down to the waste transfer station. There's been some really good work done there, big PV installation, the charging points for the recycling vehicles, etc. It's a great scheme. It's working really well. But what struck me there was our operational pattern is not tailored to make the most of the solar PV, for example. So on a Saturday, as an example, the activity in that building is a lot lower, but summer Saturdays generating lots of solar power. And obviously we can schedule certain vehicles maybe to charge at certain times. There's little things you can do there. But I wonder, just from an operational point of view, generally, are we looking at thinking around how can we tweak some of our operational activities to be more net zero without actually necessarily changing what we do, maybe changing when we do it, or slightly changing how we do it, just to maybe take advantage of whether that's solar generation, whether that's times where there's a lot of low carbon electricity, those sorts of things. I'm just wondering whether that is kind of part of this piece of work, or are we thinking about it, Brett?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So as I mentioned earlier, the Inni Cymru grant, an element of that is around purchase of software, which will deal with the management and the use of the Keys campus facility to, address the question you just raised. So I think there are other options as well. So, there is the possibility of selling excess electricity back to the grid. We do that with the Bay Technology Centre, for instance. But also we could open up some of our sites to create a community EV charging hub at weekends when, it's not being used by council vehicles. So I think that there are a number of options and we will look at them. At the moment, our primary focus is on getting the solar and all of those renewable technologies installed, and then look to optimize them as soon as we can.
Okay, I mean that makes, again, this is a data thing, isn't it? You know, you've got to understand where we've got the excess generation that we won't be exporting to the grid, or that we could maybe make use of. So,
and just to add to that, something just cropped into my mind. So, through the PBIAA, which is the Place-Based Impact Accelerator account, which is a UKRI pot of money which is being administered by Swansea University. It's £5 million, and that's about working with the local authority on a number of projects around industrial decarbonisation. So one project that we're in discussion with at the moment with Swansea University is how we can utilise machine learning, ML, or artificial intelligence to help with the how the electricity is used within a building. So, for instance, this project that I just mentioned will focus on the Bay Technology Centre. So how can we optimise that energy use, how much is used for the EVs, and only sort of like put the heating on when it knows that there are people in the room? So rather than completely heating the whole building or a suite of offices, it's trying to be, cleverer in terms of how we use that data.
Yeah.
Automatically.
That all sounds really interesting. Really good. Thanks for that. I've got one more question I think I want to pick up on from my list, which was around this 2015 feasibility study around installing renewables on our assets. I think there's reference to the Giant's Grave site in there, which is just, I can remember that being banded around since I've been a member, and obviously it's not kind of gone anywhere, and that feasibility study is now a decade old, isn't it? And I think there's a note in there that it's sort of being reassessed. Are we redoing a new sort of study, or are we just looking back at that 2015 report? Because obviously I think that is quite interesting, isn't it, to look at, well, all of our land and assets. We've mentioned a couple of schemes we might be looking at now around, Neath, for example, but what is the sort of that scoping piece looking like?
So there's two things here. So Giant's Graveyard and Longlands Lane.
Yeah.
Okay, so take Giant's Graveyard first. So we are working with a company called Talbot Energy, who have recently been successful in securing a grant from the South West Wales Net Zero Launchpad, which Neath Talbot was successful in securing the area, at least for myself and others. So this allows SMEs within the South West Wales region to apply for funding to undertake projects. It's 100% funded. The project's up to 100k. Now, Talbot Energy, their project is to look at each of the 4 local authority areas and identify suitable plots of land that could be used as part of a community energy generation activity. Okay, so Giant's Graveyard is one of those potential sites. There are others they're looking at. The criteria is there needs to be a number of off-takers. So, if it's in a residential setting, it could be homes, it could be a school, doctor's surgery. If it's more of an industrial setting like the Baglan Energy Park, large industry, for instance. So that project is coming to an end at the end of this month. So we'll have the report in the next few weeks to identify if that's suitable and what could potentially go there. I think for the Giant's Graveyard, they're considering a solar farm as being the most appropriate. Okay. Now, if I move on to Longlands Lane, we've been looking at this more closely over the last 6 months. We had a great plan for not only a solar farm, which would help to electrify the Crem, but there could be an EV charging hub, given its close proximity to the M4 and the lack of EV charging facilities on that stretch of the M4. It's an ideal candidate. We also felt there would be a good opportunity to include some sort of Neath Talbot tourist information. So as people parked there, had a coffee, they could learn more about Neath Talbot and all the wonders that are to be seen throughout the county borough. Okay. Then we were approached by Welsh Government to say that they were in advanced stages of putting an EV charging hub just down the road, within hundreds of meters. So we've gone back and revised our Longlands Lane plan. And we've only last week had interest from a company who would like to, they could potentially fund the development of the solar farm and use that as a potential training facility, because of the issues that I'm sure everyone's aware around the lack of skills around renewable technologies, and that will be addressed through the National Net Zero Skills Centre of Excellence. But this could be a real hands-on facility for those, but also supply, some of the local businesses in that area with energy. So they're both being actively considered at the moment.
Okay. That is quite interesting, to be fair. So along those lines, it's the playing fields, the former Glenavon playing fields, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, brilliant. I see Councillor Laura Williams has got a hand up. Laura?
Yeah, thank you. It's just a request that I'm one of the Margam councillors. Can we have an update of this at some point as the councillors for the area, please?
Yep. Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, people nodding in here, Laura, so officers
Thank
will reach
you.
out. Thank you.
Could I also
Okay,
request
are there any other questions? Okay,
Sorry.
yeah, I'm Councillor Rice, a giant scrave.
Yeah, please, thank
Yeah.
you.
There we are, no problem. Okay, members, are there any other questions on this item? Can't see any indications now. So, members, this report is for noting, so we note the report. Okay, so I'll move us on now to our next item, which is item 4C, Pride in Place Neighbourhood Selection Verbal Update. So we've got Lisa Willis here with us, and she's got a brief presentation, I think, for us as well, just to give us an update as to where we are with this one. So over to you, Lisa.
Thank you, Chair. I just share my screen and okay, to go into presenting mode. Why is that not? They won't let me.
Try unsharing and resharing. Yeah, sometimes that helps.
No. I'm going to have to leave it in presenter mode. Oh, can people see that it's quite small? Is it on screen, or is it? It won't let me go into
Tom. Yeah,
oh, let me go into slideshow mode. Unless I can do it. But, it's hidden under the.
If you minimize it slightly,
Minimize this.
see if it gives you.
Oh, it's slideshow.
See if it'll give you.
From beginning. But yeah.
Yes.
Yep. There we are.
Okay. Good morning. So I'm Lisa Willis. Apologies, didn't have a report in advance of this meeting, but things are changing on a daily basis, hourly sometimes. So I'm going to set the scene for the Pride in Place programme, and then happy to take questions at the end, if that's okay. So the UK Government Pride in Place programme, to just give you a bit of background of the changing funding landscape. The UK Shared Prosperity Fund, which we've had since 2022, that will end the end of March next year, so that's 31st of March 2026. And the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, which the whole of the county borough benefited, and there was a regional approach to Shared Prosperity Fund, but with local delivery and local determination and the flexibility to respond to opportunity and need. So that's been replaced by two funds. Fund one is the Pride in Place programme, which is a 10-year, 20 million, mainly capital fund, which funding is going to flow from April 2027. That's targeted at one area, one neighbourhood in the county borough. Within the Pride in Place programme, there's also a 2-year Pride in Place impact fund, which is 1.5 million to be committed by March 2027. Then Fund 2 is the Local Growth Fund, and that is a 3-year UK government source of funding, but managed through Welsh Government with local authorities. And that is 547 million over 3 years. And that funding is expected to flow from April next year. And that's currently out to consultation. And with an end date of the 19th of December, that's looking at the priorities and delivery models for that. So there's two funds replacing Shared Prosperity Fund. So this, so just to give you a bit of a background, the UK government launched the Pride in Place programme and the strategy 25th of September this year. And Neath Talbot was identified as a Pride in Place place. So that means we're eligible to receive the funding over the 10 years. And we had communication say that Neath Talbot would receive up to £20 million over 10 years, targeted at one neighbourhood. And I mentioned the Impact Fund, which is a non-targeted fund, and that's 1.5 million, but we're not covering that one today. So the Pride in Place funding is targeted on areas with the highest deprivation levels and the weakest social infrastructure. And in Wales, it's up to the local authority, excuse me, to identify where the funding would be applied. In England, UK government have identified those neighbourhoods. So just to flag, it is a challenge to identify this neighbourhood, and because we would like to see all neighbourhoods in the county borough targeted, and also maybe prioritising those areas. There are 15 lower super output areas in Neath Talbot in the top 10% of the index of multiple deprivation. So we do have deeper deprivation across Neath Talbot. So this is a challenge, and it is, to be honest, quite divisive at times as well. So just to flag that up from the start, this is the guidance we've been given from UK government. In terms of criteria to identify the neighbourhood that we choose needs to be a single contiguous area within local authority boundaries. So basically, there should be no breaks between those areas that we're choosing. And then the residents, the population criteria, the guidance mentioned between 5,000 and 15,000 residents, but the guidance also mentioned flexibility in exceptional circumstances. And also the neighbourhood selection would be supported by a clear evidence base to identify that neighbourhood which is most in need, and that's using the index of multiple deprivation as our primary data source. And a pro forma needs to be submitted to UK government in January, and that needs to include our rationale for selection, which neighbourhood you're choosing, how the neighbourhood aligns to other funding programmes such as Welsh Government Transforming Towns, evidence of local engagement, and also Member of Parliament and Member of Senate endorsement. Just to flag up the changing goalposts, I suppose. So the Welsh Index of Multiple Deprivation data, which we were assessing when we first had the criteria, was the 2019 data. Since then, that's been updated on the 27th of November 2025, and there have been some changes in the ranking for Neath Talbot. So, for example, in the 2019 data, Britain Ferry West was had the highest level of deprivation. That's switched now for 2025 to one of the Cummer Awards. Population criteria, originally it was approximately 10,000. Then the current advice is between 5,000 and 15,000 with flexibility in exceptional circumstances. The original deadline to submit the pro forma was the 12th of December, which is today. The current advice is the 9th of January. And also in terms of guidance and parameters for us to work within, the specific guidance was released on the 3rd of December. That's just to paint the picture of the situation we find ourselves in. So in terms of identifying the neighbourhood, we've looked at the overall Welsh Index of Multiple Deprivation. And for 2025, that shows Cummer 2 as the highest level of deprivation in Neath Talbot, followed by Sandfields West 2, and then Britain Ferry West 1. That's the overall rankings. Within the overall rankings, there are 8 domains. So officers have been looking at those 8 domains, and just there's a bit of on the slide here, it shows you. So income is weighted heavily, sort of 22% of the category for income, and it goes down to physical environment. So these are the domains that actually influence the overall ranking. And we've got a breakdown then of the top 10 highest ranking lower super output areas in Neath Talbot, the population figures, the overarching index of multiple deprivation, and then the broken down then across the domains, and you can see different rankings then for that. So we've looked at that as well. And then we've also looked at the deprivation factors, so income, employment, health, what is taken into consideration to inform that overall ranking, and look to map then the interventions is quite small. I can share these slides after the meeting.
Thanks, Lisa.
And also we've got a word summary document which indicates this. So for example, for employment, the consideration is the percentage of working age population in receipt of employment related benefits. And then there are 4 interventions potentially under Pride in Place programme that could work to supporting to try and improve the ranking, so less deprivation under that domain category. So all 8 domains will inform the overall ranking. So we've got a few slides. So for example, education, to the ranking takes into consideration key stage 4, average point score, then also absenteeism for the schools, key stage for learners entering into higher education, and adults aged 25 to 64 with no or low qualifications. So all those factors are taken into consideration when it's influencing the ranking of that education domain, for example. And then access to services. This looks about the average travel time by public or private transport. This feeds into the previous conversation about public transport. And then the types of Pride in Place indicative interventions that can potentially be used by the neighbourhood to try and improve the deprivation score of that area. And then we're looking at physical environment as well. And that continues. And we've got the full list, but I will circulate this. So in terms of our process to determine the neighbourhood for Neath Talbot, we've looked at all the lower super output areas in Neath Talbot. Then we've identified the top 3 areas. So there stands, so Cymru 2, which is the highest composite level deprivation area, followed by Sandfields West 2, followed by Britain Ferry West 1. So within the population criteria, so those standalone single low super output areas do not have sufficient population to meet the population criteria. So you can see they're all under 2,000 population. However, looking at the guidance, you can cluster lower super output areas into one area without breaks. And we've identified 3 areas, and that's the Upper Avon Valley Potential Pride in Place Programme neighbourhood, Sandfields and Aberavon, and I've got some maps which I can show you in a second about how we've sort of redlined those areas. In terms, so just to talk you through how we've been assessing this, we've looked at the composite data, so that's the overarching index of multiple deprivation. We've looked at the domain data and those key considerations which lead to the overarching index of multiple deprivation ranking. We've looked at additional data such as crime statistics. We've looked at other funding programmes such as Welsh Government Transforming Towns, UK Government Trailblazer programmes. We've also looked at those few tables I've shown you previously of how the Pride in Place programme can actually sort of move the direction of travel of deprivation and try and improve that level of deprivation. We've also engaged with MPs. We had a meeting on Monday this week with MPs, so Stephen Kinnock and Carolyn Harris and David Rees as an MS. They attended online. We've also had on Tuesday afternoon, we've met with our local economic partnership to look at that wider stakeholder engagement. So in terms of the process maps, but before I go into the maps, just to, as I say, it is a challenge to identify the neighbourhood, and we have sent a letter to the MPs to link in with the Wales office to question what is the flexibility in terms of the population, what is the flexibility in terms of that contiguous criteria, because we said, you know, there are 3 distinct pockets of deprivation in Talbot, one in our rural valleys areas, one more coastal area, and one in our urban areas with distinct needs and distinct challenges and also distinct opportunities. So we're seeking advice on that. We're also getting the data, so the officer assessment process, externally verified by Ross Skill at SQW, who has been working on the Regeneration and Economic Development Plan, and he's due to come back to us end of play on Monday with that external validation. There is a deadline of January to submit this neighbourhood, so I just talk you through the maps. So firstly, the Avon Valley map. So this is the Avon Valley as a whole, and looked at the areas. So as you can see, Cummer 2, which is ranked top in deprivation criteria for Neath Talbot, linking with Gwynfi. They are within the top 10% most deprived areas of Neath Talbot, and then linking in with Cummer 3, which is within the 10 to 20% most deprived. We have Bryn and Carmarthen, which is also within the 10 to 20% most deprived, but that is separated by Helena and Bryn and Carmarthen, which are, I go to the previous slide, which are within the 20 to 30% most deprived. So if we link all that area, it's not really meeting the criteria of the most deprived areas. So if I show you the red line map for the potential Upper Avon Valley Pride and Place neighbourhoods, so it's got Gwynfi, Cummer 2 and Cummer 3 in that, and that brings the population to 4,735, which is just under the lower end range of the population. So I can show these. These are probably quite small, people can see, aren't they? So looking at Britton Ferry and Neath East area as a whole, as you can see, there are different areas of deprivation ranking from Britton Ferry West 1, and then so that it shows you the index of multiple deprivation and also deprivation levels here. And then we've got a red line mark showing a population of just over 15,000, and that is taken into account those LSOAs in the Britton Ferry and Neath East area, which are within the 10 to 20% most deprived neighbourhoods. Then we're looking at Sandfields and Aberavon. This is Sandfields and Aberavon as a whole. And then, as you can see, there's a wide range from 10% most deprived up to 50% least deprived. So in order to have, we've done the red line map again here to show a contiguous area of those lower super output areas within the 10 to 20%, and that is just under the 15,000, that's 14,308 population there. And so that's our assessment. I'll just check I've covered everything. So we talked about the background, the neighbourhood criteria, the WIM data, the WIM domains, how we've considered those additional information. Those 3 areas are our long list, and we discussed those with the senior leadership team, with cabinet member briefing, and then we've got 3 long list areas. We're seeking advice. We're looking to get the data externally verified, and there is a deadline on the 7th of January to submit this. So we are against the clock, but we are seeking advice. And it is a challenge. So I think I'll pause there and happy to take any questions.
Thanks for that, Lisa.
Just to add, Chair. Yeah. I mean, I'm grateful to Lisa and the team who've done a huge amount of work on this over the last couple of weeks. And we mentioned short deadlines before. We know that there are many councils who are not able in Wales, who are not going or weren't going to submit their choice by the 12th of December. And I think that's why probably they've had to extend it. We had put in place a process to try and get to committee by that stage. But as Lisa said, things change almost weekly for us. And we are mindful that when we are briefing members on some of these issues, that we say one thing one week and then something else the following week. And that's not because we haven't got up to speed on it. It's just that the world is constantly changing. And what we tell you one week might not be relevant or might not be correct the following week. So we apologise for that, but it's just the world that we work in, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, that can't be helped, can it? And I appreciate you coming to committee today with quite a thorough update, actually. And, I thought it was important that members, had that. We've all heard different rumours, coming around as well. So I think it is always good to have the information presented to us. So I can see Nicola's popped a hand up as well. Do you want to add anything, Nicola, before I go to questions?
Yeah, I was just going to say, Chair, that the information, as Simon has indicated, it keeps changing on a daily basis, which is not particularly helpful for members to understand what the direction of travel is, you know, in which we're going in. And it's not helpful for officers who have got to try and identify a suitable neighbourhood within a very, very short period of time that is backed up by evidence. But that's what we're trying to do. We've got the submission date, I think it's the 9th of January. So we will be working towards that deadline, and we'll obviously have to take a decision through the cabinet process before then. So it is very, very tight. We also have to ensure that we have got endorsement from the MPs and the MSs. So we need to ensure that that endorsement is submitted with our proposed neighbourhood of choice to the UK government. So there's another requirement upon us. And just to say, you know, we are looking at the data at the moment, and we do, you know, obviously the weighting of that data. Lisa in her presentation indicated that there's different levels of weighting for each of the criteria. So it's quite a complicated process. So we are getting some external advice on that to help us to identify which neighbourhood is going to be the neighbourhood of choice. But just to say, you know, officers are trying to do their best behind the scenes to fully inform members of the current position, but we are sort of, as has been alluded, we're trying to nail jelly to the wall because it's constantly changing. Yeah, and it doesn't help that Christmas is in the period before we have to submit as well, when staff are you know, taking leave. So, but we're trying to do our best, and we'll ensure we'll try and keep members as up to speed as possible on any changes that we are made aware of. Oh, and just one final thing. Following the engagement session that took place with the MPs and MSs on Monday, the leader and deputy leader have written a letter to Stephen Kinnock and Caroline Harris, and that has been copied by officers to a senior official within the Wales office to ask for clarity on what the levels of flexibility are, because we are sort of working in the dark. We had a meeting with Wales office officials last week to try and establish a little bit more clarity, but they would not be pinned down. And they basically said, you know, that it's up to the individual authorities to identify what level of flexibility they are happy to take, which is really unhelpful because we don't want to submit a proposal to UK government, which is then refused. So that letter has gone out from the leader and deputy leader, and we should hopefully get some clarity following consideration of that letter. But we will try and keep everybody as informed as we possibly can. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicola. Simon.
Just one little point to add to what Nicola just said there. I mean, one of the questions we're asking is that, you know, if we put forward a proposal and you didn't like it, what happens next?
Yeah.
Are you saying to us, that's the end of it, you don't get the money, or are you saying to us, you get another go to submit a proposal that we do like? So, and I think that's pretty critical for us, because I mean, obviously the deadlines are very tight. We you know, they wanted us to declare before Christmas. Now it's afterwards, so we don't know quite how it would work if they didn't like what we were submitting. So it's a point of clarification for us.
Well, certainly best of luck getting that clarity. I really hope you do.
Yes.
So I'll just make one comment before we go to questions. Yeah, I don't envy you in terms of the task of trying to allocate this money. I mean, from officers and cabinet members, you know, politically, this is not a nice task, is it? You know, someone's sort of going to lose out here, whatever happens. I will say, just with the long list, when I hear the fund was announced and I rattle through the county in my head, I came up with the same three. You know, because I think you're in the right, definitely in the right track. You know, whether that's from the data or from instinct. So I think we're definitely on the right track with it. But how you pick between those three areas, they all need support, don't they? It's going to be really challenging. I'm going to let some members ask their questions, and then we might run up a few things at the end. So I'm going to go to Councillor Dacey. Andrew?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'd like to have more information on how it was selected, to be honest, because you rushed through that quite quickly. And Aberafon being one of it's all of a sudden the fifth worst place, gone from the worst to the fifth for some reason. Right, I assume it's because shopping centre and facilities, because obviously the standard of living isn't great in Aberafon. But I would like to have more information and how the selection process. I'm not trying to be clever. I just want to go through it and see why all of a sudden we've gone from the worst to the fifth. So I want to know why.
Yeah, for sure.
It's because the Welsh Index of Multiple Deprivation data changed for us, and that changed last Thursday. So whilst we had one set of data and we were working on one thing, in the middle of the whole process, the whole data set changes.
So if you can perhaps give a little bit of clarity, but I don't know whether Andrew might be worth sitting down with someone outside the meeting to delve into it.
I'm happy to share. So it's a spreadsheet. So there was 2019 was the last set of data. So Britain Ferry West 1 was ranking 25th, so that was the highest, followed by Cummer, which is 33rd, and then Sandfields West 22. 2025 that changed, so Cummer 2 became 15th over Wales, so that's top in Neath Talbot. So the lower the number, the higher the deprivation. So
right.
13th, then Sandfields West 2, yeah.
Right. I wouldn't mind I mean to sit down with someone to explain it better rather than go through it all on you now. That would be rather than drag everybody through the same question, I would like to have arrange someone. So Tom, could you arrange out with me with someone, please?
Yes, certainly, Councillor. Yeah, no problem. Okay.
Right, thank you.
Thanks for that. I'm going to go to Councillor Gareth Rice next. Gareth.
Thanks, Sean. Similar to Andrew, we covered some of it. Just was delighted to see Britain Ferry being considered in amongst this, because I think everyone knows how poor the state of Britain Ferry is at the moment. However, slightly alarming, it's just Britain Ferry West and not Britain Ferry East. But it seems to be including Britain Ferry East in the residential figures to get the area. But you concentrate purely on Britain Ferry West, and I think anybody who drives through Britain Ferry will understand you drive through Britain Ferry East, and it is Britain Ferry East, and particularly the main road in particular, that is bringing the place down to a very low level, and it will reflect on Britain Ferry West. So I think Britain Ferry as a whole should, if they're going to benefit, should certainly benefit from this funding. And I'm Britain Ferry East councillor, and I will fight as much as I can to be included within this. Should we be lucky enough to get any funding at all? But yeah, if you're having with Andrew sort of a separate brief outside this, I'd really very much appreciate if I could be included in that as well. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, guys. Lisa's just shared the slides. I think she might be able to clarify the red line boundary, which is the area that would be covered by this funding if Britain Ferry and Neath East was chosen. And I think it includes both sides of Britain Ferry, but Lisa can clarify.
Thank you, Chair. So Britain Ferry West 1 is the third highest ranking area of deprivation in Neath Talbot, and that's the LSOA. So that as a standalone has got 1,601 residents. So that wouldn't qualify because that's way below the 5,000, although depending on the flexibility criteria. So if we cluster Britain Ferry West 1 with Britain Ferry West 1, and then we've got Britain Ferry West 2, Britain Ferry East 2, Britain Ferry East 1, Neath East 1. So with these areas here in the LSOAs, so if we cluster these, and they're all in the top 10.
Someone needs to mute. There we are. Let's try that again.
So if we look at covering from Britain Ferry East 2, click on bigger, yeah. And then looking at Britain Ferry West 1. So this area marked in red is the contiguous area. So basically there's no break between the LSOAs in Britain Ferry and also Neath East. So that would be potentially a pride and place neighbourhood within, well, it's just 21 people over the 15,000 criteria, but that would cover those areas. So even though, so it's focusing, so the funding would then, although the neighbourhood board would determine where the funding goes. So whatever area you choose to receive the funding, there needs to be a neighbourhood board set up with an independent chair, and they will have to develop a investment plan for 10 years, looking at projects and working with the local authority, but the neighbourhood board will have the overall steer on where the funding would get directed in the neighbourhood of choice.
Okay, thank you. Simon?
I think, as Lisa's outlined here, there isn't an easy choice. There are a lot of permutations about what you include and what you don't include. And ultimately, unfortunately, unlike what we've been able to do with the SPF funding, where we've been able to target the areas that we think need most help, this doesn't allow that. And the other point to note, I suppose, is that you could have one of the areas, LSOA or MSOA, where you've got some really deprived streets right next to an LSOA, but because there's more wealth further into that area, it might just elevate it, and then it doesn't get included. So you'll absolutely have a cut-off date, a cut-off point at the end of that not ward, but the sort of areas they determine the sectors, and we won't be dealing with the other side of the street. Which doesn't make any sense to any of us, but that's kind of where we're going to end up.
I certainly see that in Sandfields East. I've got one area, when I've looked at the data in the past, there's a sort of contiguous area of deprivation, and then we've got an LSOA that's got some really affluent residents and lots of deprivation together, and then that averages out into sort of somewhere in the middle of the table, and it's tricky. Okay, I just can see Scott and Andrew have got an indication. Scott, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, can hear you fine.
Yeah, great. Only a couple of points. Echoing some. Only a couple of points that I'm open to raise, really. I mean, firstly, since the announcement of this fund, it's been a shambles, to be quite honest with you. It hasn't been cleared, and the goalposts continuously are getting changed. I was really concerned in the offset of this announcement that the Avon Valley was going to be missing out. It's pleasing to see now that considerations, through our council, that the Avon Valley is back on the map at this moment in time, but this will be dependent on the political decision, of course, outside of the council as to whether or not these areas or areas within the Avon Valley meet the criteria in terms of population. Because the population criteria came in after the original announcement, my understanding is, and the original announcement was around areas of deprivation, which it should be, because there are pockets within this local authority, in local authorities across Wales and elsewhere, where there's a lot of communities, unfortunately, who won't meet that population. So it'll be dependent, and I'll be watching this like an hawk in terms of what the politicians outside of this council come back and say around the flexibility that's to be had to try and support the most deprived communities in Wales. The other bit of concern as well, I mean, it was my intention just to listen in today because I spoke at great length last week in Cabinet briefing. It is disappointing to hear again, that when you come out of the Avon Valley, you can turn right to enter into Pontryfen/Carmarthen, or you can continue on the top road of Carmarthen, which meets directly into the ward of Cummer. Now, like I said last week, and I'm going to say it again, hopefully for the last time, we can't pick and choose whether or not Bryn and Carmarthen are part of the Avon Valley. Now, the council have used the theme for many years regarding us as the Upper Avon Valley and Bryn and Carmarthen as part of the Lower Avon Valley. That being the case, and that being said, there is a pocket of deprivation in Carmarthen, which my understanding is it's under Sagwas Hill, which links directly onto the main road connecting the Upper Avon Valley. So it's really disappointing to hear today that Palenna is a cloud or a gap to stop Carmarthen possibly forming part of our figures within the 10 to 20%. So I'd like clarity on that yet again, if we can, please, Chair. and I leave it by there a minute. There's a lot that I can talk about. It's disappointing that these figures have come out, but they're no surprise because, you know, when you look at what this authority, what this council have done over previous years, when you've closed a school and a care home and a library, and I could probably spend half a day explaining, you know, the cutbacks that's taken place. It doesn't surprise me then, you know, X amount of years later, the impact that is currently having now. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Scott. I don't know, Lisa, if you can give Scott any clarity to his question there now. If not, I'm sure you can pick it up outside the meeting.
I think it's just, Chair, that as we said, you've got these sectors that are clearly defined on the WAMD data. At the moment, we are being told that that is the driving force behind the decision. That's why we've gone back to UK government to ask for clarity and see, is there an option to target all you know, different areas of the LSOAs across the county borough where we think the need is most, or is it set that you have to have a contiguous area and that you would struggle in that area to have the higher output areas? So that's the clarity we've gone back to UK government to seek.
Because just to add, you know, and I appreciate it's a challenge, but looking at the criteria in the map, so in the Avon Valley, so Bryn and Carmarthen is separated by Bryn and Carmarthen 1 and Pelenna, and Pelenna is within 30 most deprived, and Bryn and Carmarthen 1 is in the 30 to 40% most deprived. So if we're looking at targeting those higher areas of deprivation, that is not within the 20%, and that's looking at the maps that we've had from the WIMD data maps from Stats Wales. So
yeah, as Simon said, that's the driving force to it at the moment. Okay, I'm going to go to Councillor Dacey again, and then I'm going to call in Nicola, and then we'll see where we end up. Andrew?
Thank you, Sean. Similar lines to what Scott said. I've got old Aberafan, which is absolutely deprived and needs all the attention in the world. And Bagla Moors is lumped in with it, which obviously raises the score because Bagla Moors is a more affluent area. So there's clearly the divide line there around the hospital area, and it bumps up the score for Aberafan when really it's, as we all know, it is a place of multiple deprivation. So it's the same sort of lines. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Andrew, for making that point. Nicola, have you got anything to add?
I was just going to indicate, and it's sort of been alluded to already, you know, the lower super output areas that have been spoken about today, these are not being defined by NPT or any officers with NBT. These are national statistics or national areas that are informed by statistics that are collected on a national level. So we haven't identified the extent of these lower super output areas, nor have we identified the geography of them. These are nationally collected, and we are informed of the lower super output areas and the different characteristics and different data sets within those lower super output areas. So I just wanted to clarify that. So we haven't created these, we have been given this information to work with in the same way as we've been given the criteria by UK government to identify neighbourhoods of choice. And if, as has been sort of suggested earlier on, if we could identify more than one neighbourhood, you know, there are 3 clusters that have been referred to within this meeting that are probably, you know, all worthy of financial support from the government. But we are unfortunately working with criteria that we have no control over. We've sought that additional clarification in terms of the flexibility, and we look forward to getting that response. We'll ensure that, you know, we undertake a fair process as far as MPT Council are responsible for, and we'll try and make sure that we keep every member up to date on the direction of travel, you know, albeit the timescales are very, very tight. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Nicola. Just a couple of really quick points from me now. So in terms of the process going forward, between now and the time we're going to put our report together, I know we're, you know, data's being verified and there's things happening there. Are we going to be scoring these areas and using a sort of mathematical approach to this in terms of our recommendation? I'm just trying to unpick a little bit how we're going to try and narrow it down to an area if the current criteria as we understand it is that we have to pick one.
So we're going to wait for the feedback. I think Nicola mentioned we've written to the MPs, or leader and deputy leader have written to the MPs seeking advice following the meeting on Monday on the flexibility, because ideally we'd like to choose 3 areas and target funding appropriate as we'd have with shared prosperity fund. We wait to see what that criteria comes back with. Also, we wait to see on Monday what if the external evaluation of our data, so then the appropriate thing. I think in terms of the decision then, there are a number of factors. So there's the WIM data, which as Nicola mentioned, is national data, and there's the breakdown domains. And there's also, in the criteria, there's also mapping against other funding programmes. There's also looking at how the pride and place funding could be used in those areas to actually improve the situation. So those all factors we need to consider, and that's going to be taken. There's cabinet booked in for 6th of January or
6th of January.
6th of January. So that will all be presented to cabinet, and it's going to be a cabinet decision.
Okay, thank you. The only other question I had was around, in terms of existing things in the area, in the communities. I'm always conscious, for example, the Avon Valley have had support from wind farm funding, which has had some impact on the community that maybe Britain Ferry doesn't have access to, or maybe Sandfields doesn't have access to. And is that in the round in the discussion, or is it not? And I'm conscious that the Avon Valley's got more deprivation in some of those areas as well. So it's all in the mix, isn't it? It's a difficult balance. But I was just curious whether that wider landscape is being looked at in terms of investment.
We have looked at those 3 areas and what other funding they can secure or have secured or can secure in the future. So I know in the Avon Valley, for example, there's the Trailblazer, which is looking at economically inactive. There's I think that's 2 million a year, and next year I think there's funding. We're looking at Britain Ferry, and that's got a place plan so that potentially can access transforming towns. Aberavon and Sandfields, we've got the seafront, it's got investment, but we're looking to see what other funding can be, potentially local growth fund. But that's currently out of consultation. So we don't know what the delivery mechanism will be for local growth funds. So some areas so we have done that mapping exercise to look at the wider, and that's going to inform the report for cabinet as well.
There we are.
There's an element of how much impact you can make with the money as well, and what sort of purposes you could use it for going forward. So I think there are a range of factors here, and as we've said all along here, and sort of like a broken record really, there's no right or wrong answer particularly. It's going to be one where members think we can do most with the money, and which satisfies the criteria and critically gets the endorsement from our MPs.
Okay, thank you. Right, so just find my this being just a verbal update, we'll note the update. Members, in pre-briefing I did mention we have identified a potential option to have a special meeting on the 6th of January if we wanted to look at this in scrutiny, the final report. I don't know how members feel about that. I wanted to offer that out to you guys. One option could be that officers keep me in the loop between now and then, and we maybe hold it in abeyance. But I mean, we have got the Christmas period, so it's going to be a little bit difficult to do that. I don't know if members have any thoughts on what we might want to do. Wow. No thoughts at the moment. Yeah. Well, okay. If people don't have a strong feeling about bringing it to scrutiny in again in January, then all I'd ask is that officers keep the committee in the loop as much as they can, and appreciate that obviously we can't be necessarily inform the head of cabinet, but if there's developments that, like we discussed today around the criteria, if that can be circulated, I'd certainly appreciate that, and we can make sure the committee are sort of kept in the loop. I see Councillor Rice has popped his hand up. Gareth?
Yeah, thanks, Sean. And just be practical as well. Between now and 6th of January, what progress could be made to bring back to scrutinise this again? I think maybe just being kept in the loop by yourself at your discretion would be a better option.
Yeah, I think the only thing is the report in January will have a sort of final decision on an option. So it could be selecting one area, for example. But I think given what we discussed today, I'm not sure how much more we could add into that process at this point in time, given the deadline. Yeah. So yeah, there we go. Okay, so with that said, we'll note this item. I'm just going to hand to Tom for a moment because we've had a few members have to leave the meeting just early.
Just considering quorum, Chair. Let me just double check the numbers again.
Because I appreciate we're about to run over our allocated time, but we've had 2 members leave during the process of the meeting as well, due to other meetings and commitments. So we just need to check whether we'll be correct to do the last item or not. So I'm just going to let Tom do the maths.
I think we might have lost Councillor Bowen as well, haven't we?
Have we?
We would need 6.
Okay.
And the criminals. I don't know whether you want to pause briefly and I can see if I can contact one of the members.
What do you guys, Craig?
Be paused tomorrow, so we'll just check whether my member has just dropped out for a technical issue, whatever the case may be. I could see in the chat as well, Councillor Jordan.
Yes, Councillor Jordan is still here. Got Councillor Jordan as
not yet because he's still present. If he was to leave,
because Councillor Jordan does need to leave in a few moments. We would be struggling. So then we'd need 2 members, correct?
Yeah. If we could just pause then 2 minutes, Chair. Tom can do some work in the background and we'll see if we can be quick.
Okay, if we can just hang on for a few moments, members, we'll just see if we can have a quorum to continue the meeting. Thank you.
Wales of local government.
It's a nightmare.
I think so. This I understand.
Yeah.
Because of time, but this needed.
Right, Councillor Bowen is back in.
Right.
So Councillor Jordan goes, we wouldn't be correct again. So
That's to leave. It's a private.
Well, Councillor Jordan, I believe you need to go imminently, don't you? So yeah. So I mean, Councillor Jordan's out basically.
We need to possibly see if I can get Councillor Williams to come back. She's gone somewhere else. We haven't had any responses from Councillor.
Sean, sorry, we can't act as substitutes, can we?
Unfortunately, no.
Okay.
No, unfortunately not, Councillor. We need actually members from the Scrutiny Committee. We do.
Okay, no problem.
Oh, thanks for that.
Councillor Hampton is in.
Nice and isn't it? He's got a cabinet.
It's on around.
What? It's on the back. It's on just the
Councillor Reynolds is just trying to.
Yes, yeah.
Councillor calls around.
Hi, Councillor Reynolds. Thank you for joining. Are you okay to stay just so that we can remain core to finish the meeting? Is that possible?
No, that's not.
Right, okay.
Where's his powers aren't what they were, Tom?
No, they're not. Not even the jumper.
She's in person.
There was an email circulated about these.
Apologies, members. The only other thing I can suggest if we have asked the team to rein Councillor Mason, who isn't here. So we know we can't get Councillor Henton because he's had to go to the other meeting. Everyone else is here that would be, I think Councillor Phillips is struggling. I'll do it first.
Good.
One. Two.
Members of this committee normally.
11 because of the changes. So week 6 is our.
So we've got one. So we've got Councillor Percy, Councillor Dacey, Councillor Rice, Councillor Helen Kerry Clark, Councillor Whitelock, Councillor Bowen. We got 6.
We're back at 6.
Okay, so when Councillor Jordan goes, so okay, we're fine.
Okay.
Right, we are okay.
We're fine. Let's go.
Right, members.
Thank you, Alice.
Now the quorum is sorted. No, please nobody leave. We've got a few more items to deal with. We've just got to go through our forward work programme, and then we have a private item to deal with as well. So apologies for that. So I'm just going to take us on to the forward work programme on 157, 178. And if I can just hand over to Tom just to give a brief update on that, please.
I'll be really brief. So as members are aware from debriefing, the Celtic Leisure Agency Agreement report is coming to the committee now. That's on the 23rd of January. However, the committee decided I've decided not to take that to the committee now, and that's going to come off the forward work programme. The art strategy, there's some confusion of the date that's going to cabinet, so that's still up in the air. So the chair, I'm arranging a meeting for the chair to speak to officers to decide whether we do need to scrutinise that or not, but it would likely be a post-decision report if that was the case. Markham, as you're aware, because of the current delays to that, Chris has advised that he'd like us to have our workshop later in the year in line with the kind of the delays that have happened, and also he wants to push back the all-member seminar, which I understand is going to happen as well. But the chair is keen for you still to have a site visit, which I'm going to try and get for very early in the beginning of the new year, just to kind of facilitate that. Obviously, we've dealt with Pride in Place just now, so I understand the process is going to be, we're going to keep you up to date as best we can, but we haven't at this point in the meeting for it. Those are all I have at the moment in terms of updates.
Okay, thanks, Tom. I can't see any indications from members at the moment, but as usual, you can get in contact with myself or Tom to add any items to the forward work programme. So I will now take us to agenda item 10, which is access to meetings. We need to consider the private report in private. So could I have a proposal and a seconder to move into private session, please? See Helen Kerry Clark proposing, and I can see Councillor Dave Whitelock seconding. Thank you. Are there members who not indicate to the contrary? I would take it this motion is supported to go into private.
See no indications to the contrary, chat. Therefore, we can now move into private. I'll just stop this building.
Okay, and we don't have any public and press in, do we?
No public or press present.
Brilliant.